Hi, everybody, and welcome to another Accessibility Talks. We're glad you can join us for our monthly virtual meetup on accessibility, inclusion, and usability. It's a space where we learn from guest speakers and connect as a community. I'm your host, April Sides. I'm a principal software engineer at Red Hat, and for a visual description, I am a white woman with short, spiky hair. Some have called it a faux hawk. I guess I've called it a faux hawk. Glasses, and I'm wearing my red Alley Talks or Alley Cat shirt. My pronouns are she, they. Before we get started, a quick reminder that Alley Talks is dedicated to maintaining a safe and welcoming environment. We ask everyone joining us today, speakers and attendees alike, to follow our code of conduct in chat and during discussions. You can find the full version on our website. Our goal is to ensure a respectful space for open dialogue and learning. We also want to take a moment to thank the partners who make Alley Talks possible. Special thanks to our bronze supporter, Principal Financial Group. We also want to recognize our Alley Cat Club monthly members. Every contribution helps us keep this community growing and our content free and our talks accessible to everyone. If you'd like to support Alley Talks as a sponsor, please visit our website to learn more. Your contributions go directly toward compensating speakers and improving our events. You can also double your impact through corporate matching programs like Benevity. Just search for us under Alley Talks by Midwest Open Source Alliance. Have questions for our speaker? Here's how to ask. If you're watching the live premiere on YouTube, you can ask your question directly in the live chat. If you're not watching live, you can leave a comment on the YouTube video or continue the conversation on LinkedIn or other social media channels afterwards. So today we have our very own AmyJune Hineline. She is a certified, or no, she's not certified. She's certified. I don't know. She's certified in stuff. She is a certification community architect at the Linux Foundation, and she is going to present Accessibility, the Never-Ending Story. But before we get started, AmyJune,
Yes.
you want to be a loofah farmer?
Yes, I do.
What does that entail exactly? I've never thought of loofah farming.
Okay, so first I have to give a little bit of context because if anyone has met me, you know that I have to tell a story. In the 5th grade, I went on a field trip to a Native American reservation along the Russian River called Yakima, and they introduced us to gourds. And so we all signed up to be a part of the American Gourd Society. So the next summer, I was really excited and got this packet of seeds from the American Gourd Society, and there were loofahs. And I'm like, ooh, I want to grow loofahs. And my dad was like, loofahs grow under the sea. And I'm like, they can't possibly because I have a seed, right? Because when people think of loofahs, they think of the bass sponges, right? So I grew a loofah and it was the most amazing thing ever. And ever since I've been a kid, I have this dream of having a farm with goats and chickens and rabbits and loofahs. And I have grown loofahs as an adult. And I want to show the loofah the largest loofah I've ever grown. Isn't that
Wow.
amazing? And what a loofah is, I got to get it in the
Is it
camera, right?
spongy? Okay. Oh yes. My
Yeah.
mom had one of
So,
those.
so
Yes,
you
for sure.
cut them up, right?
Yeah.
And then you sell them. Now, as an adult, I realized my dream might not become possible because when you go to the drugstore, you can get a loofah sponge for like 25 cents. But that's where the chickens and goats and rabbits and all the other stuff come in handy. So yeah, I am a proud member of the American Gourd Society.
Still? Do you have to renew that membership?
No, you just have to write in and let them know that you want the seeds from year to year. So
Nice. Yeah. When you started naming animals, you saying the animals were running around. I was like, so the loofahs are also running around. So yeah, a lot of nice visuals for
yeah,
this one too.
they grow like cucumbers, like off a vine, and
Okay.
you just
Oh,
peel
neat.
them and dry them out, and that's it. Pretty
That's
easy.
pretty cool.
So yeah,
On another note, you're here to talk about accessibility, so I
yes, I
will
am.
let you turn on your screen share and get started.
Thanks, April. So accessibility is often framed as something we finish. You know, we audit, we ship, we fix, and we move on. But accessibility behaves more like a story than a task. Over time, our standards change. We've noticed this a lot in the last couple of years. Technology changes. Technology moves really fast. And not only that, but the people that we work with on our websites and digital assets change as well, you know, the teams. So even if we think we've won, The story keeps changing. So today is about learning how to stay in that story without burning out or losing momentum. And here is a bit.ly link that I couldn't figure out how to make nicer. So there's a QR code as well if people want to follow along. And also at the end of the presentation, there are a list of resources that I really like to share. Some housekeeping, there are some images in this deck. Most of them are decorative. For the sake of brevity, I'm not going to describe them. But if you visit the slide deck, it's an accessible slide deck where the descriptions are added for those images. So like April said, I'm AmyJune Hineline. I work at the Linux Foundation. I'm the certification community architect, which means I help the education team build certifications and exams for different projects. I'm also on the training team where we're starting to write content for different things, and I've added a whole accessibility portfolio to our training deck as well, which is really exciting. But that's not what we're here to talk about. So today we'll kind of go through that never-ending story theme. We'll talk about why accessibility is never done. We'll look at some of the standards because I don't want to assume anyone's knowledge base. We're going to talk about real users and how they use our products, and how the standards keep evolving and how our users and the technologies they use to asset our content needs to change as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about the EU Accessibility Act that went into effect a little bit less than a year ago, because I think some people aren't really familiar with that yet. So why is accessibility never done? Meeting WCAG reflects a point in time. As our content changes, as our features evolve, as we get feature requests, as our technologies updates, new barriers can emerge if accessibility isn't actively maintained. A really good example that's pretty current to April 2026 is a couple of months ago, iPhone rolled out that like glass theme, liquid glass, and we all discovered it wasn't very accessible very quickly. But often teams think about accessibility as a finish line. Like I said, we audit, we ship, or we fix, and then we ship, and then we forget about it because we hand it over to a stakeholder. Now, when I first started getting into web work, it felt very logical. It's how many teams are taught to approach accessibility. But the problem is not any one of those steps is wrong. The problem is that the model assumes that accessibility and usability is stable after we ship it. But as soon as content changes, like people are adding content, or our contributors rotate, or technology shifts, like the iPhone example I gave, the structure really starts to break down. That finish line approach breaks down because an environment around our work never stays the same. Browsers update, assistive technologies evolve, and our standard shifts. Something that worked well a year ago can become difficult or unusable as platforms and tools change. And let's talk about those teams. People move roles, they switch projects, or they leave entirely. We find this in the Drupal project a lot. People can have time to contribute. They're part of the accessibility team, but then they move on to a different job or they move on past Drupal. And we have to, reequate the team with what accessibility really means. The content never stops changing. We add new pages, we add new features. Everyday edits continue long after, maybe an accessibility consultant audits your pages and assets. And each change creates this opportunity for accessibility to kind of drift unless it's actively maintained. So accessibility doesn't disappear all at once. It slips away gradually as changes accumulate unless we keep tending to it. So if accessibility depends on a finish line, we won't survive those real world use. It won't survive. Thinking of it as a story, instead of the finish line, helps us plan for change instead of being surprised by it. Drupal makes this impossible to ignore because accessibility must be built to survive turnover, updates, long-term maintenance. Contributors change while the code continues to evolve and can carry forward both bad decisions and hidden barriers. And this is true with most of our open source projects. Every world has rules, and ours, accessibility rules, come from our standards and laws. They exist to give us a shared knowledge, shared guidelines, not to freeze progress in time. So, what are standards? Standards help us agree on what accessible means. Um, WCAG tells us what to check. It doesn't promise accessibility will stay intact forever. So, those standards help us agree on what accessible means, especially across large or distributed teams. But they also describe expectations at a moment in time. They don't stop change from happening. So many of us are familiar with, WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Most of us are working in 2.1 still. It was a standard until maybe a couple years ago, but a lot of things changed with 2.2. It took a couple of years for the community to agree on what the changes were. But these updates exist because people were still blocked on sites that claim to be accessible. So the WCAG evolves as we learn more about those barriers and those real user experiences, especially as they change. 2.2, for the most part, did not remove or change any existing success criteria except for one, which I'll talk about. So everything in that 2.0 and 2.1 still applies. So it has 2.2 has a strong emphasis on things that weren't really thought about before. We're thinking about users with cognitive and learning disabilities, thinking about more motor impairments, more mobile and touch interactions. And then also, as we all start to tighten up our security on our sites and assets, we're trying to reduce friction in common tasks, drag and drop, authorization, and entering into forms. 2.2 focuses on visible focus, usable interactions, predictable help, and less cognitive frictions without changing, like I said, most of the 2.1 rules. We no longer fail pages for simple code grammar errors. Instead, we focus on whether those errors actually break the experience for the user. It's a shift from technical perfection to functional usability. So in 2.2, WCAG 4.1.1 about parsing became obsolete. And that really dealt with a lot of HTML stuff. And our browsers and our operating systems can mostly deal with that nowadays. So it felt a little antiquated. So real users, real context, and real variability. Accessibility is not just about permanent disabilities. It's not really about disabilities at all, but I'm going to frame it in that world for the next few slides. Accessibility can be temporary, it can be situational, it can be episodic, and it can be inevitable as we age. What does that mean? It means that the work is not about helping other people, it's about designing for our future selves as well. Depending on what organization you look at, about 15% of the world's population lives with some form of disability. That's over 1 billion people. This includes people you know, and likely people who are watching and people who are recording this session. And accessibility isn't just about those permanent disabilities that we sometimes think about. Permanent disability is something that a person has all of the time. We have temporary disabilities, which is like recovering from eye surgery or needing to dim your screen. Situational, this is not being able to use a mouse because your kids steal the battery to use on their Xbox controller. So now you're stuck on keyboard navigation alone. And episodic is something I learned about in the last couple of years. This is where your ability to use technology or ability to navigate the real world sort of ebbs and flows depending on your condition. This can be things like diabetes, when your blood sugar's low. It can be depression. It's really hard to get motivated and do things and see things correctly when you're depressed. Cancer, when you're in and out of chemotherapy. Again, it's where someone's needs fluctuate day to day. And invisible disabilities are very real. I am hard of hearing. You cannot tell that by looking at me because I don't wear hearing aids. Some people have things like lupus that affects their energy levels and makes them fatigued. That's not something that we can see. And again, as we age, we all become more disabled. Accessibility isn't just for those other people, it's for all of us eventually. And with saying that accessibility isn't just about disabilities, it's about inclusion, and inclusion isn't about special treatment. It's about removing barriers that shouldn't be there in the first place. It's about human rights, not special privileges. I always have a hard time when people say, my child is in special ed. And I'm like, well, special ed isn't special, it's education. We all have human rights and our deserve the same sort of treatment. So accessibility can also shift depending on the device someone is using. A phone in bright sunlight, a laptop on a desk, a keyboard instead of a mouse. Remember, my kids are always taking my batteries. Or voice input. They can all create different interaction needs. So the environment around us matters too. Lighting, background noise, movement, or maybe even, if you live rurally or on a conference Wi-Fi, an unreliability connection. They can affect how easily someone can see or hear or interact with the site. Again, fatigue plays a role, pain, illness, or simply being tired at the end of the day. It can reduce precision. It can definitely reduce your focus. And for me, it reduces my patience for having to do complex interactions. Do not ask me at the end of the day to two-factor authenticate and then log into my email and get a code to simply check, social media. It's not going to happen. And cognitive load, stress, multitasking, information overload can make memory heavy or complicated tasks harder to complete as well. So I talked a little bit about assistive technology or user agents, but I want to talk a little bit more about what they are and why we use them and why usability and accessibility is so important around these things. Assistive technology, sometimes you'll see it abbreviated for AT. It's any device or software or equipment that helps people work around challenges that they have in learning and communicating and functioning on the web or any sort of digital assets, and really in real life too. If you think about it, a wheelchair is an assistive technology to get someone around who might have like a broken leg or quadriplegia. Assistive technology is not niche behavior. It is how real people navigate the world when interfaces fail them. Different days require different tools. Some days, some people need a wheelchair. Some days people require a cane. They're not exotic tools. They're survival strategies. So designing without them in mind is like assuming everyone's travels the same path. So to tie it back into digital assets, at the beginning of the day, I don't necessarily need glasses. I can do, Command plus and zoom in a little bit. By the end of the day, I will need glasses. So it's sort of that same thing, same day, different tool to navigate my experience. So screen readers are used to listen to the content of a web page. They convert text to speech. We should keep in mind that screen readers can be used along with visuals on the page for folks with cognitive challenges. Screen magnification software is much to its name. It enlarges the screen content to make it easier to read for users with partial sight impairment. And this is something to think about when you're designing your content. Your content consumer might need screen magnification and doing that, Command plus. So making sure that our images don't become pixelated when they're zoomed in, and making sure that our screens hop to a different breaking point, like doing mobile, when you're getting to the larger plus adaptability. Some people only use a keyboard, that's using the tab and arrow keys and the escape function. So we need to make sure that the same experience, that they have the same experience as someone who uses the typical mouse interaction. So think about your complex menus. Does your content consumer have to navigate every single menu item and every single sub menu item to get to the last menu item to go see the contact form. And that can be cumbersome, and you might lose your content consumer after a few clicks. There's sliders. Can they access a slider via only the keyboard? Can they close dialogues without having to go through the whole page to, exit out of your modal? And tab panels, like accordions and paragraphs and things like that. The interaction should be presented in an intuitive and predictable way. Predictability is really important with usability too, because if one page is designed where the enter key opens up the dialogue, and the next page, the down arrow opens up the dialogue, you might lose your content consumer too. So make sure it's predictable patterns, intuitive and predictable. The Zoom, we use it to read and interact with content, whether it's low vision, aging eyesight, or maybe I'm using a smaller screen like a 13-inch laptop. When our layouts break, when our text overlaps, I get that a lot on my laptop. I have a 13-inch laptop. Or when the controls disappear, you can't find the control at all. They're hidden behind something. The tasks become really hard and difficult for some people to complete. Virtual reality is fun. When it first came out, I was really excited because it opens up all these new opportunities to improve accessibility, especially in the gaming world, by being more inclusive and having these immersive experiences. But it also introduces these new challenges. As a newer technology, it lacks established accessibility standards, and many interactions need thoughtful design, and they're working on that with some of these new standards. We're in a space where the rules are still being written, which gives us a chance to shape virtual reality and augmented reality, and keep accessibility in mind from the beginning. Here's a list of some more technologies that are used. I'm not going to go through all of them, but if you look at the slide deck, feel free to research these on your own. There's eye tracking, accelerators, keyboard keys, pop-up and animation blockers. I really invite you to look at that because those are very annoying to people who use assistive technology. Folks don't always have the ability to see visual information, so the information is displayed on braille displays, and then we have all kinds of reading assistants, head pointers, motion tracking, single switch entry devices, speech input software. Not everybody only has one accessibility need. Many times people have multiple accessibility needs. So we need to design in a way that accounts for all kinds of situations and all kinds of ways that people interact with our technology. The same person may need captions one day and keyboard navigation the next. It's not one configuration, it's adaptability. And these examples are not edge cases. They are everyday moments where design decisions collide with the reality of our content consumers. Accessibility succeeds or fails here. There's a picture of a keyboard up here. I've misplaced my USB for my wireless mouse, or forgot that I needed a USB for my wireless mouse, and I'm using my keyboard only. Grateful Dead tickets just went on sale in a small venue. So I have been, and I am camping out on the refresh page quite a bit. I'm not going to say the name of this company because they're bad, but here's a screenshot of me waiting in the queue for these Grateful Dead tickets. There is an insanely long mega menu and no skip to main content link. No skip to main content link. And I am freaking out because I want these tickets. So I'm tabbing through all the things, and the timer is in the corner looking at me and counting down, and I'm becoming nervous about being able to purchase my tickets. So that's two things that are inaccessible to me. One is my cognitive load of a timer. Why there's a timer, I don't understand. And two, that insanely large mega menu. When I got booted out of that queue, I had to go all the way through that mega menu to get back in the queue. Let's talk about how we meet with others online. I'll just use Meets because that's what my last organization used for team meetings. here's all our faces, we're having fun, we're doing stuff, we're in a meeting. But I'm hard of hearing, so I need to enable captions on my screen. So now those captions push everyone's faces up, and the captions only stay on the screen momentarily. But it's doable. I'm going to put my glasses on and maybe hide Lauren's face or something. But it's a meeting. So, what's a meeting without someone sharing their screen? So, this is Meets. Someone shares their screen. As you can see, the captions are pushing up the slides. Imagine if you're on a small iPad or a 13-inch laptop. My captions are falling off the screen. I can't hardly see anyone's faces. I might need to use facial cues for context, because I'm hard of hearing. And I can't see anything what's going on in that screen. Oh my God. And then someone is now using chat and everything becomes so much harder. So again, thinking about different ways your content consumers use your product and how many things can happen in just one interaction. So let's look at some examples in real life. That was real life, but seems like ages ago. What breaks? So we have invisible or weak focus states. This is when we're navigating with our keyboard. We want to know where we are on the page, and we should have a highlighted area that lets us know where our cursor is. So focus rings are sometimes removed for clean UI. Like this is an example, there's a label, and then the label, the second field is where my cursor is. There's a 1 pixel outline, but it has really poor contrast. It's the same color as the other one. It's barely bold. This is a 2.4.11 error because it requires minimum size and contrast, not best effort. So now it's a little bit darker and it's a different color. See the difference? That's barely noticeable, especially if you have like blurry vision. You might not be able to see that dark, the dark gray is a different color. But now we have a blue and a thicker focus, which makes it pass. So a fixed or sticky element header. This can be a toolbar, a cookie banner, our favorite things that are all on every website now, those chat widgets, maybe even a footer. It covers the area where the keyboard focus moves. Common causes are the sticky headers cover anchor targets. The cookie banners will overlay content at the bottom. And sometimes if you're using keyboard only, it's really hard to get to that to close it. Fixed widgets are overlapping form controls. So in this image, you can see that it's like a chat window. Different people are chatting. Across the top, there's a sticky header that blocks the content from the first user, and then at the bottom, there's an ability to add your chat that covers content from the last user. Drag-only interactions are very inaccessible and hard to use. A drag-only interaction, this is the only way, this is to complete the task, you have to drag, and some users cannot complete the task. This can be Kanban boards, it can be reordering lists, it can be reordering, like in the back end of Drupal, reordering how you want your menus to appear. So you want to make sure that your users can have an ability to click onto that and drag and drop those elements. Tiny click elements. These are things on your phone or on your applications that you just can't quite get to because they're too small. So WCAG 2.5.8 talks about target size, where interactive targets should be at least 24 by 24 pixels and have sufficient spacing. If users have to tap very precisely, there will be mistakes. In this image, you can see that the content is really close together. The target buttons along the bottom, there's not much space in between them. So if I was to try to hit the map and the book online, I might hit the wrong one because there's no spacing, no semantic spacing between them. Forms that ask again. These are things like logins, resumes these days. I notice you upload your resume, but you have to enter the content again, re-entering email addresses, re-entering names, checkout flows after login. So 3.3.7 prohibits unnecessary re-entry of known information. So you can see here that this form, there's an enter password and a re-enter password, where the next one, you just enter your password. Have email confirmation fields. When we have email confirmation forms, it forces us to retype the identical information. Say you already have like a palsy or a memory deficit, it increases the effort and the error risk involved. For Drupal sites specifically, we have member portals. So consider passwordless or the magic link logins where you get a login link sent to your email. Drupal already uses one-time login links for password resets, and there are contrib options for passwordless. Yeah, that may be a word. Passwordless flows that verifies identity without turning access into a memory test. This is my favorite one, memory-based logins. I think I would fail the Alzheimer's test where you have to know the elephant, the apple, and the banana. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, elephant, banana, car. So even the simple ones, or quote unquote simple ones here on the internet, type the password you just created, or they're puzzle-based or recall-only authorization. This fails because it disallows authentication that relies only on memory or cognition, no copy and paste. This example that I have up here is a CAPTCHA challenge with an algebraic equation. Now, I might have known that when I was in 8th grade algebra, but there is no way I could solve that now. This is a really far-fetched example, but this is an example of a CAPTCHA test. So back to that meeting that I was on where I needed captions and I needed chat and I needed to see my colleagues' faces, and the screen share came up and there was huge blocks of text. I went to the project manager and I said, hey, do you think you could break up the blocks of text into more chunkable, digestible slides so it's easier for me? And he called me an edge case. And then the very next all hands meeting, this slide came up and I just thought it was really perfect. When you call something an edge case, you're really just defining the limits of what you care about. So imagine someone that's really trying to use your product and they describe you as a one-off and an edge case because they're defining the limits of who and what they care about. Okay, so everything is changing, what I used yesterday to navigate the web is not what I'm going to use 2 weeks from now. So what's on the horizon? We talked about WCAG 2.1 and 2.2, but let's talk about 3.0. This became a working draft in January of 2021. I'm not sure of its status, but this version introduces a more flexible, user-centered approach. It broadens coverage to more disability types, especially cognitive disabilities, which we haven't given too much thought of in the past. It supports the modern technologies that I was talking about, AR, augmented reality, virtual reality, and voice interactions. And it's not just about web pages anymore. It also applies to our media players, our browsers, and our authoring platforms. So we're thinking more about the people who author our tools as well. We thought about them before, but now we're thinking about them more. And that's really great for us who develop software. 3.0 is designed to evolve with technology. It includes easier to update guidance and how-tos to help teams apply the standards. One of my favorite parts of 3.2 is use common, clear words. That's great because technical docs that include plain language summaries help everyone. Even a developer at the end of the day, it's a lot to parse through, technical jargon. So, it has that flexibility to have that plain language summary. And it shifts from the idea of does it technically pass to does it actually work for people? It's not lowering the bar by any means, it's just measuring the right things. It mirrors how people actually experience technology. This is kind of like accessibility growing up. It tests and scores outcomes and includes specific testing models. It defines three levels of conformance. They're changing that A, double A, triple A to bronze, silver, and gold. I'm not sure if that's a marketing thing or not, but that's what they're doing. So 2.0 is active, where 3.0 is still in development. So if you have some concerns or some ideas about 3.0, you're welcome to join in the discussion. The old WCAG standards were sort of on a binary. They either passed or they failed, where 3.0 is more outcome based, with a grade, like a graded kind of scoring. The web content was basically the focus of the 2.0s, where now it's HTML documents are not just web content anymore. And it's it was focused on code level testing before, where now we're looking at more functional and user testing. 3.0 is more user experience, like I was talking about. Cognitive, emotional needs are taken into account too. Fatigue. It's a broader view, talking about usability, clarity, consistency, personalization of how we use content. And it's not backwards compatible. It's a new model. So it might be like in tandem. So the stakes are higher now. Last June, we came up with some new guidelines universally. The European Accessibility Act, it's abbreviated as EAA. It's a directive aimed at improving the accessibility of products and services across member states, European, especially for people with disabilities. If your product or service is used in the EU, accessibility is now a legal requirement as of June 28th last year, 2025. So build to WCAG standards from the start, because accessibility defects can block market access, not just usability. So they're hitting people in the pocketbook as well with these penalties. It applies to any business, any organization, opening in the that operates in the EU, that offer products or services covered under the Act. There's a couple of small exceptions for micro enterprises, the very smallest companies, but for most orgs, including public and private sector, compliance is required. So if you're doing business in the EU, we are a global market, if we think about it, accessibility is no longer optional. It was created for consistency, to sort of, what's the word, musically, harmonize accessibility laws across the EU member states. So the requirements were different from state to state. It was aimed to reduce any sort of fragmentation in the market. Products and services shouldn't face barriers because regulations varied across borders. But it's mostly about people. In the EU, nearly 135 million people have disabilities, and this is designed to improve access for them in their daily life. And the Act aligns with the commitment to the UN Convention of I think it's called the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's close to our ADA Act here in the United States. It reinforces the right to access information, services, and technology. It covers a huge array of products. Ticket machines, ATM machines at the bank, smartphones, operating systems, so, if you're running, a Windows box, it has to be just as accessible as a Linux box, computers, E-commerce platforms, anywhere where you buy your products, websites that have banking services, emergency communication services, ebooks and readers, audio and visual players, looking at YouTube, looking at Vizio, all of those sorts of things. So what does it really require? It mandates accessible design. That includes user interfaces all the way down to hardware. It means clear navigation, structured content. So not just how the content is created, but how it's laid out. So your content consumers need to be smart about the way they enter their content, and compatibility with assistive technology. It covers documentation. It covers customer support. It requires ongoing testing and updates all the time to stay compliant. It really pushes for inclusive design versus accessibility. It gives tech and open spaces really that clear picture that we really need to build accessibility from the start. So, I worked for a team when I first started getting into tech where we would do an audit of the accessibility, we would fix it, and we'd ship it to our stakeholders, which worked really well back then, not having the knowledge. So this was sort of the traditional workflow that I followed. Was accessibility work would sometimes happen during the design or just before launch. After deployment, accessibility issues were treated as bugs or feature requests. So I'd have to go back and make the developers cry that they'd have to redo something. And there's an assumption that compliance is static once your product ships. The model doesn't really account for updates, new UI patterns, evolving standards, all the things that we talked about before. So this is sort of that traditional workflow in image form. Here's starting at launch with the wireframes. After deployment, like I said, accessibility is treated as bugs, sort of that linear path, right? And that last stop is that deployment. When we test for accessibility at all the stages, we bake accessibility in better. We bake it into our websites from the beginning. It really alleviates the headaches, later on. So this is an image of our sort of more historic path as well. It's still linear, but we inject testing at every phase of development, even after deployment. But this is where I want people to start thinking about where the story shifts. Instead of that linear model, let's talk about it in sort of this continuous reality. Accessibility becomes continuous improvement, not cleanup. We design for change instead of fearing for it. We reimagine that life cycle. The process is from continuous website improvement. We need to remember that the accessibility is never done. We want to make sure that we strategize and develop in a style that allows for malleable and flexible changes as the guidelines evolve. And that's so important. I'm going to say it again. We need to design, strategize, and implement in a way that allows flexible changes as things change. We want to make sure that our solutions, when we implement them, have impact, that they're not just quick fixes, not just hot fixes until the next time, but thoughtful improvement on best practices. And we don't just do that once, accessibility should be iterative, applied to every phase of the website lifecycle, from design to deployment and beyond. And we need to learn. We need to learn what worked, what didn't work. That's where retrospectives with our team come in. They give the team a chance to reflect and adjust, so each cycle is stronger than the last. This improvement plan might feel like a slow start, but once the wheels in motion, momentum builds fast. Remember when you first started to ride a bike, how you couldn't quite keep up, you kept falling down, but once you learned to keep pedaling, that momentum kept moving you forward. Like that Volkswagen going up the hill too, once you get your stride, you just have to keep cruising. So the never-ending story comes down to shared responsibilities across team. You can't just have the accessibility team. You need to have designers, not just one designer. You might have one designer that focuses on accessibility, but all your designers need to know about readability, contrast, layout, interaction patterns. It determines that the interfaces are usable from the start. Developers, not just one developer, but every developer, how we have to learn, new JavaScript when it comes out. We have to learn the new HTML patterns when they come out. Well, developers and designers and editors and everyone should learn accessibility rules as they evolve as well. So semantic markup, keyboard support, focus management, ARIA implementation, that can be difficult to learn. Maybe that you have a person who specializes in ARIA, because sometimes that can be tricky. But for the most part, everyone should be able to know a little bit, if not most, accessibility rules. Editors, if we take the time to, editors and stakeholders alike, if we take the time to teach our designers and our developers accessibility, we need to do the same thing for our editors, make sure that they know how to structure their content semantically using headings, making sure that the links are clear, making sure that there's alternative text on their images, making sure that the design layout is understandable and navigable. And then our stakeholders, understanding that there's priorities, and that accessibility is treated as essential, not just optional. And like I said, none of these work alone. Standards guide us. Laws reinforce urgency, and teams sustain accessibility through things that we do every day in our practices. So standards guide, laws motivate, but culture sustains accessibility. And I have that written on the bottom of this slide. Standards tell us what to aim for, right? Laws raise the urgency, but accessibility only lasts when people building and maintaining our projects keep it alive. And that story doesn't end when we launch. That's why I called this the never-ending story. It continues with every update, every content change, and every new contributor who joins the work. QA is an important part of your team. Accessibility is an important part of your team. I don't know how many websites I've seen recently where I could tell there was no QA done on the content that was written. So, have those checks and balances on your website. Do it before it launches. Don't just wait for someone to tell you that there's a problem with it. Keep moving forward so progress doesn't quietly sink. Accessibility should create safe spaces and environments where everyone can participate, not desert where only perfection survives. We have a friend of A11yTalks who says that, progression over perfection, I think is what she says. And I really take that to heart. So I do have a list of resources. I do cover WCAG, the EAA stuff. I have a couple of nice resources for how to write alternative text. Now, what I like to tell people is, as part of your daily learning, maybe subscribe to someone on LinkedIn who's an accessibility enthusiast. Maybe subscribe to some newsletters and take part of your daily learning time to learn about accessibility as it evolves and changes too. And there's another link to the slide deck. And thank you.
All right. Thanks, AmyJune. That was a really comprehensive talk. I do have a few questions if we have a little bit of time here. So there's a lot of moving targets, as you said, and a lot of standards and things like that. How do you stay up to date on the latest in digital accessibility?
So like I said at the very end of the presentation, I subscribe to a few people I find as accessibility experts on LinkedIn, and I make sure that I have their notifications starred so it appears in my newsfeed every day. And then also, I work with, I don't work with them, but I look to the W3C schools RSS feed, and anytime anything gets updated or published, I get the old school RSS feed to my email. So I do it a lazy way. I subscribe to other people. So
It's
And
not
then
lazy. It's how you do it.
And then to keep your IAAP certification, you have to do a certain amount of continuing education units. So I like attend conferences where there's some accessibility topics that I don't normally follow. You know, I'm not a web developer, but I'll go to a web development talk just to make sure that I understand the words, understand how people are fixing it, because a lot of my stuff is like auditing, and I want to be able to tell the people how to fix it. I don't know how to fix it, but I can tell you how you can fix it. So, you know, going to those accessibility webinars and conferences are really helpful.
Nice. So how did you get started with digital accessibility?
I'm a nurse by trade, and I hospice nurse specifically. And I would have to help people like read their emails or navigate the web, and because they couldn't do it themselves. And when I first got into Drupal and I was working for an agency, I was like, what? You can make this stuff accessible and they don't? So that sort of like just was this huge red flag for me of like, oh, we don't care about this huge sect of people, you know, because I know that disabled people are loyal to their websites and things, like just going back to like someone having, you know, being able to read their email, they're going to stay on the platform that's accessible to them, and they're not even going to go anywhere else because they've had difficulties. But yeah, it was mostly like, wow, people actually make it less accessible to make it pretty. And I did not like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Another question. What keeps you energized about digital accessibility or accessibility in general?
What keeps me energized is I want everyone to know the same things. I want everyone to have the same opportunity. I want everyone to be able to come and play, you know, whether or not the playground be outside or, you know, a game that we're playing or an app. It just feels very lonely not to have everyone involved. So that's what kind of keeps me energized. And in the accessibility community, everyone has that energy that they want to have everyone be included as well. It's like one of the most inclusive communities to be a part of, because we want to be inclusive, you know? So it's like this like circle, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I have one last question. Can you hum or sing the Never Ending Story theme song?
No.
You don't want to put that earwig in everybody's ears when
No,
they
I
finish this
can't,
talk?
because, you know, I don't know it by heart because it's kind of annoying. I did play it round and round and round at Drupal camp, Florida Drupal camp, so it would get in everyone's ear. But I have the advantage of not being able to hear very well, so it never got in my ear. No, and I can't hum worth a crap or crud. So no. I'm just gonna
Okay.
call that one
All right.
no.
Everyone will have to go and look it up or watch some Stranger Things or something. So if somebody wanted to get in touch with you after this, what's the best way for them to follow up with you?
On LinkedIn, I like LinkedIn.
Okay.
LinkedIn is a great celebration of people doing everything, and the news there isn't as doomy as as everywhere else. But yeah, LinkedIn is good. It's Volkswagen Chick on LinkedIn.
Okay. Cool. Well, thank you again for
Thank you.
sharing, and this has been really great. All right, so let's continue the conversation on LinkedIn. You can find us, you can find our event at linkedin.com/company/A11yTalks. And we're always looking for new voices, especially from marginalized groups in tech. So you can visit our speaker page to learn more. Then reach out on LinkedIn or email us at team@A11yTalks.com to start a conversation. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss a talk, and follow us on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and Mastodon to stay in the loop. You can find all of these links and more on our website. That's AlyTalks.com, A11yTalks. And thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.